8 months ago, my life changed forever. I can't tell you what the weather was like that day, what I had for breakfast, or even the first song I heard on the radio before I left the house. In fact, to be honest, I can't remember any details of that day until I discovered a quiet little arcade downtown that I had somehow never noticed before. I can't even remember its name. On a whim, I went in there and looked around. At first glance, it was just an ordinary arcade, a moment frozen in time that could transport you back to the distant gaming days. Back in the early 80s, I spent a lot of time in arcades with my dad. It was the only hobby we shared together, and one of the only safe activities we could truly enjoy given my condition. I suffer from something called cleidocranial dysplasia. I'm not going to waste your time nor mine on an in-depth study of what it is. You have the internet, and so do I. Basically, I'm much shorter in stature than anyone I know. My bones are brittle, my spine is all skewed, and I've had dentures from an early age. I don't mean to be rude or offend those who suffer from this condition. I'm just sick to death of having to explain it to people, so I've learned to stick to the basics. I'd say my main passion in arcades was pinball machines. I spent hours in front of them every day after school, studying the circuits and perfecting the perfect angle of the flipper ball that would hit the chutes I needed to maximize my score. As soon as I mastered the machines in one gym, my father would find us another, and we would start all over again. Some combination of light, music, and geometry mesmerized me. There were times when I would start playing and just completely lose myself until I ran out of quarters or it was time to go home. Even after my father died, I continued to pursue the hobby, partly to always stay close to him in some strange way, but mostly because no matter what changed in my life, pinball machines remained constant. They were a source of comfort and zen, something that is especially rare in life these days. It wasn't long until I found the corner where the pinball machines were stored. One by one stood 4 of my favorite machines of all time, the ones I had spent the longest time mastering as a child, and the ones that often brought me the most comfort. There was Theater of Magic with its sultry sorceress gesturing for me to come closer, holding out her palm. Monster Bash with its motley crew of musical monsters inviting me to rock. Twilight Zone lured me into the in-between space between light and shadow. And finally, Medieval Madness, urging me to save an ancient kingdom. I pulled a couple quarters out of my pocket and headed for the Theater of Magic. An impromptu date with the first woman I'd fantasized about as a child seemed like the perfect way to kill time. Hey, don't judge me, man. At least it wasn't a succubus from the original Dungeons and Dragons monster guide. Just before I slid the silver into her nest, I saw with the edge of my left eye something I didn't initially notice. There was a pinball machine in the corner that I had never seen before, which was odd because there wasn't one that existed that I had never played. I even went on vacations to other countries just to play new or rare machines. The machine was called Madame Marilyn's Occult Pinball. It had a window on the back glass with a functional little female fortune teller inside. Mechanical inserts in pinball machines were certainly nothing new, but they were always pleasing to the eye. Making my decision, I slipped my silver into the slot and tossed the extra quarters onto my apron. I pulled back the piston, took a deep breath, and let it go. The moment my ball was launched into the center of the playing field, the song Pinball Wizard by The Who came on. I was laughing so hard I wasn't paying attention, and my ball hit the drain. Normally, I would have been pissed at losing the first ball so quickly. But this machine had autosave, so instead the ball was sent back into the tub. I went to the change machine a couple times and probably easily missed $1.20 in quarters before I really got the hang of the game. If you've played pinball before, I don't need to explain in detail how it works. You hit bumpers, knock down falling targets, ride subways and high trails, pay attention to special assignments while avoiding drains and munch holes. If you've never played a game like this, I'm going to have to question what you've been doing with your life. There were more missions in this machine than I've seen in pinball machines before in my life. The skill rolls alone made me sweat so much that I missed the target more often than I'd like to admit. By the time I finally made it to the master level, I sat there from morning until dusk. Of course, not all machines had them, but when they did, it was always a pleasant surprise. The wizard level in a pinball machine was akin to the secret final stage in a regular video game, only 1,000,000 times harder. If you beat any of the wizard levels in the machine, you made it to the big leagues. I had beaten them all, and I'll be damned if I didn't beat this one too. It took me another 30 minutes of the most exciting game of my life before I overcame it. I was in the zone, becoming one with the car when it happened. The music began to glitch and turn to static. The lights flickered in a strange, mesmerizing pattern, and the mechanical divination built into the back window came into motion. A sultry voice came from the speakers over the interference. "Congratulations, Jerry, you have defeated me. I will now fulfill your heart's desire." To say I was stunned is an understatement. I know what you're thinking. How does this machine know my name, right? Yeah, that thought crossed my mind at that moment, too. I'm old enough to have seen every movie I can think of that should have told me it was time to get the hell out of Dodge. Then again, I've always been a curious guy. I ended up blabbing about the first thing that popped into my head. Honestly, it was more of a nervous joke, but how many times can I relive one of my favorite cinematic moments, right? "I want to be big," I shouted out, perhaps a little too loudly. It was a phrase from my favorite Tom Hanks movie, and it seemed super relevant at the moment. "Your wish will be granted," Madame Marilyn replied profoundly. Madame Marilyn rebooted, and my name popped up in the top position of the scoreboard, replacing someone named Arthur. Probably some kid, but I wasn't interested in dwelling on that. I went home and passed out, becoming dead to the world. When I woke up, it was still dark outside. Every inch of my body was throbbing with pain. It took me over 10 minutes to just sit up in bed and turn on the lamp. Before me stood the most horrifying sight I had ever seen. My bones seemed to somehow elongate before my eyes, stretching my skin grotesquely in all directions. I cried out in pain, but didn't move for fear of tearing myself apart. My joints shifted and crunched as each part of me dislocated and shifted into a new position. This was simply impossible in werewolf movies. I could feel my organs moving around inside, suddenly detaching from their former places. Vomit and bile were not so much spewing out of my mouth as just oozing out in sticky strands. My vision completely blurred, and the sutures of my skull began to throb wildly. I passed out from the pain as I felt my quadriceps muscle snap like a guitar string that had been wound too tight. When I woke up again, I was startled by the bright fluorescent hospital light. According to my nurse, I had been out for almost a week. She assured me that they had done everything they could to help me, but there was only so much they could do. In my drug-induced confusion, I didn't realize at first what she meant, at least not until she brought out a mirror to show me my reflection. My initial reaction was laughter. In years past, I had seen similar trick mirrors in Halloween stores that showed you some horrible monster with your face on it. A quick glance at the horrified nurse knocked that thought out of my brain, and I began to sob inconsolably. What stared back at me from the mirror was something between Frankenstein's monster and the guy who was turned into a walrus in the movie Tusk. My flesh had more stitches and staples on it than the local craft store. My lower torso was mostly missing, and significant portions of my upper torso looked more like mutilated parts of a corpse than myself. That was 8 months ago. It was the first time I had told anyone about what had happened that day. Up until now, everyone thought it was a botched home invasion. That was the leading police version, which at some point I just went along with because who would believe the truth now? What scares me is that of all the pieces I've lost or put back together, my fingers are mostly intact. A little longer, sure, but those were the only things that didn't have to be somewhat reconstructed and reattached or thrown away altogether like other things. On the positive side, I can still play pinball. My insurance covered one of those electric elevator wheelchairs, so I can adjust my height as needed. In the last month, I've been playing more than usual. I heard there's a big tournament a couple towns away at some place called the Corpus Arcade.